Good morning, everyone. Welcome to day 2 of the Mroz Institute Summit on Diplomacy, Transitional Justice, and Global Governance. Thank you for being here this morning. We have a fantastic series of sessions for you this morning. And we're beginning with the first session. It's a panel discussion with Dr. Emily Whalen, Mr. Hilton Smith, Mr. Mitch Sonkin, and Dr. Tim Johnson. Dr. Emily Whalen is a historian of U.S. foreign policy and the Middle East. Dr. Whalen earned her PhD in international history at the University of Texas, Austin in 2020. She is a senior non-resident associate at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. She has been a postdoctoral fellow at the Clements Center for National Security, the Ernest May Fellow at Harvard Kennedy School's Belfer Center for Science and International Studies, and an affiliated scholar at the American University of Beirut's Center for Arab and Middle Eastern Studies. Previously, Dr. Whalen worked as a historical consultant for the EastWest Institute, an international non-governmental think tank specializing in track 2 diplomacy. The Mroz Institute is founded and continuing the legacy of the EastWest Institute. Dr. Whalen is joined by Hilton Smith, the president of the Advisory Board of School of Languages, Cultures, and World Affairs, Mitch Sonkin, senior advisor at the MBIA Insurance Corporation and the member of the Mroz Institute Steering Committee, and Dr. Tim Johnson, the former dean of the School of Languages, Cultures, and World Affairs, and member of the Steering Committee of the Mroz Institute. Dr. Whalen will start with a few remarks, and then she will facilitate the discussion about this book that is available here. And then after the session, you're welcome to talk to Dr. Whalen. Maybe she will sign a copy for you, but the books are available for our guests, complimentary copies. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much, Max. I guess, I don't know if, sorry? I don't know that it's, oh, okay, good, I'm on now. Great, I was gonna have to practice my projection. Thank you so much, Max, and thank you to everybody who has made this convening possible, and particularly to Bambi, whose logistical prowess has gotten us all here. I am so grateful to be here, and I kind of can't believe that this book is real. It was in 2014 that I began work on it, and so it feels very, very good to have it come into fruition. My remarks today are I'm gonna keep it relatively brief, because I think between the four of us, we're gonna have a pretty interesting discussion, and of course, we want to keep it open for question and answer. I'm gonna start, though, with a question. And the question is this, and particularly to the students in the room. If you had $5 million a year for the next 5 years, how would you make the world a better place? That is the question that started it all. And by it all, I mean everything. I mean the EastWest Institute, I mean the Mroz Institute, I mean the book, I mean my career as a historian, and my friendship with a lot of the folks in this room. It was a question that a man named Ira Wallach asked John Edwin Mroz in a Chinese restaurant in Amman, Jordan, in 1980, I think, 1979 or 1980. And John had an answer, and his answer was to create an institute where conversations could unfold despite the fact of the Cold War and despite the fact of a lot of animosities. 79 and 80 were years of a lot of tension in the world. Of course, the height of the Cold War was going on. There were renewed tensions in the Middle East, and it was a scary world and an uncertain world in a lot of ways. So when the EastWest Institute began, it began with a very simple premise, which was just that conversation between human beings was possible, even if they belonged to countries that didn't speak to each other or didn't communicate fully. The EastWest Institute grew really rapidly in the 1980s, and it grew because people saw its value. And in the course of writing the book, I think what I came to understand is that something that I say in the book is that when we think about foreign policy, a lot of the ways that it's portrayed in the media and a lot of the ways that people talk about it in public are as if it's a chess game, as if it's something to be won or lost, and that there's a competition. And this kind of like surface level chess game is something we can get into international relations theory if you want, but I would suggest don't ask me any questions about it because we'll be here all day. But this kind of realist thinking about the world is only really at the surface level. And foreign policy is actually more of an ecosystem than a chess game. So the way that the Institute operated was to operate within this ecosystem and to facilitate connections within this ecosystem. And it did so by talking to folks who were maybe not at the top level, but sort of adjacent to the top level of diplomacy, what we call track 2 diplomacy. We can talk a little bit more about the history of the Institute, I think, in the remarks, but I want to emphasize that it was a really unusual organization. And part of the reason that it was unusual was that it reinvented itself many times. So it was devoted to reducing East-West tensions. And then in 1990, the problem of East-West tensions it didn't dissolve, but it really changed, the framework changed greatly when the Cold War ended. And the EastWest Institute was able to reinvent itself many times, in part because of John's brilliance, and in part because it had established itself as an organization that was of use, and that people who are working in the foreign policy world really relied on for the conversations that needed to happen. So when you enter into the 1990s, the EastWest Institute then kind of becomes a clearinghouse for a lot of folks in newly independent countries, what were formerly countries of the Soviet bloc and formerly parts of the Soviet Union, for a lot of these countries to essentially learn the basics of democracy. And this is where John was very much aided by a man named Stephen Heinz, who would become an important part of the Institute's history. And John and Stephen worked together to educate a new generation of democratic leaders in Eastern Europe. And then the world changed again. And it changed in 2001 with the September 11th attacks on the United States. And all of a sudden, the concept of East and West really expanded to include more of the globe. And this is sort of when the Institute becomes a place where you have a lot of different projects and a lot of different spaces in the world. We can talk, again, I don't want to get too into the details on this, but I think that to talk a little bit about the book, it was in 2014, like I said, that I got asked to write this book. And that's an important year because it is the year that John passed away. And it was also the year that I met Karen. So when I was brought on to write the book, I kind of had no idea what I was getting into. And for those of you who have written books or will write books someday, I can tell you there's a reason not a lot of people do it. It's very hard. It was a labor of love and a labor of confusion and a labor of frustration and a labor of joy. And throughout all of that, the person that I relied on the most really was Karen. She was a brilliant friend and a brilliant mentor, and many of the stories in this book come from her. So I see it really as a tribute to her. And the thing that I found the most really in conversations with her and in learning about the Institute from a lot of folks was that really the Institute had kind of positioned itself as having two founders, John and Ira, but it really had three founders, and that was Karen. It would not have succeeded without her tireless efforts. So I'll end my remarks there so that I'm not yawning on too long, but maybe I want to ask my fellow panelists to offer a few remarks. Mitch, do you want to kind of talk a little bit about your involvement with the Institute and its legacy?
I'm happy to. First, let me, apart from saying good morning, let me try to set background a little bit from my perspective, because it's going to be at variance with some of the other things you may hear today, in the sense that John and Karen were dear friends. John was actually a college professor of mine and a longtime mentor. So we go back way longer than I even want to be able to acknowledge or admit. I feel Karen's presence all the time, and I also want to acknowledge the fact that her daughter Jessica and granddaughter Elena are here this morning, and that creates a better aura around the room from my perspective. My involvement with the Institute was from inception. John had met Ira Wallach, as Emily described. He presented this question and challenge to John. John, in his typical fashion, didn't let a minute go by to seize the opportunity. He called me, and at the time I was a young lawyer on Wall Street, and said, "We're going to start this organization. Ira Wallach has agreed to provide the seed funding. I said, congratulations, what exactly does that have to do with me? He said, well, we need somebody who is going to not only set it up, but we're going to need a lawyer on our board to make sure that we keep things on the up and up and steer in the right direction and figure out how to problem solve when we need to problem solve. Those are things I could clearly do. But from the perspective of international affairs and involvement, I was uniquely unqualified to be on that board. Nevertheless, our first board meeting consisted of John, Ira, me, and one other gentleman, which was held in one of Ira's favorite restaurants on the Upper East Side in New York. And there, the Institute was truly born. John went about to not only attract other board members, but to begin to build an organization and team, which in its time was a true powerhouse. But apart from being a powerhouse, John and the Institute, as Emily pointed out, were true chameleons. The ability to change with the times, the ability to change with the times, the ability to adapt and adjust and get boots on the ground in the places that were going to have the most impact at the right time was a unique ability that John and the Institute had. And that carried over into the formation of its board. It carried over into the contacts that John was able to make. I was fortunate to have been on that board for many, many years, to have at times given John advice so that we could keep he and the Institute out of trouble. My grandson is calling. And it was quite an adventure. And it took us to great work in interesting, sometimes awkward places around the world as the essence of the concept of creating an organization where there would be people brought together at that time, East and West, for extended periods of collaborative research was truly unique, and it worked. It worked because it helped to create a new generation of leaders, of thinkers, of military people who may have been on different sides of the border, may have been on different sides of the conflict, but when things started to go wrong, had the ability to pick up the phone, call one another, and take certain messages to the highest levels. One thing I will say to students is that we may study politics, we may observe what goes on in the world, we may study foreign affairs, but whatever you see on the surface is truly just the surface, because some of the real work goes on in what's now referred to as track 2 diplomacy and behind the scenes. And that was a skill, that was something that John, Karen, the Institute, everybody that was involved had a unique ability to be able to create and pull off, and it resulted in, I think, an organization which, until John's passing, because he was a true social entrepreneur, really did stand the test of time.
Thank you. Hilton, you also served on the board of the EastWest Institute, if I recall correctly.
Yes.
Could you just give us some remarks maybe about the things that you saw at the Institute in its later iterations, and about the developing relationship with the College of Charleston?
My father-in-law, Catherine's dad, had been an early member of EWI, and he invited Catherine and I to join him. We went on trips in various places of the world with the board. We're very impressed. And as my father-in-law aged, I was asked to be on the board. I was there for about 10 years, and just found it to be amazing. I came in right after the wall, the Berlin Wall had been taken down, and it was a huge celebration. We were in Prague with all the leaders that had been alive at the time this started. Gorbachev, Mitterrand's wife, President old George Bush, just an incredible group of people. And Catherine and I both went to Georgetown. We had international backgrounds, but the Institute took it for both of us to a different level of the significance and the importance of the Institute, which was seen as a honest broker. John Mroz kept his word. The Institute kept its word. And with that as a background, they were brought in and allowed and were able to create resolution to many, many issues. And then step forward, I'm off the board. And part of when I was on the board, we had one of our board meetings here at the College of Charleston. That was in 2006. And at that time, we had 40 board members from all over the world that were just going all over the College of Charleston campus. The college was incredibly excited about having this occur. And it was really a special moment for us. And then moving forward, John died in 2014, which was always a challenge because one of the things we as board members always were looking at is who would be the successor? Who was it going to be? And for a while, I thought it was going to be Stephen Hines. He left. He went to run the Rockefeller Brothers Foundation, which was a great job. But it left the Institute with a hole. We never solved that. And after John died, Karen, who I knew, Catherine and I knew John and Karen as friends as well. But with my relationship with Karen was much more social. I was really working more with John. And Karen called me in July of 2020. This is right after COVID hit. And she said, Hilton, we are really in a bad way at the Institute. We have found that without John, we're no longer able to make the impact. We can't get the people in the meetings. We can't make things happen the way we did. And we've decided we're going to disband the Institute. We're going to close it down. And we are looking for an academic institution where we can put our archives, our awards, history of what we've done in such a way that it can be found by historians. And we have a large sum of money. And right now we have directors on our board that really think it ought to go to Tufts, or it should go to Notre Dame, or it should go to Stanford, Thunderbird. And Karen had remembered that we started this school in 2007, Languages, Cultures, and World Affairs. John was actually here when we announced the school, John Mroz. John helped name the school. John helped give the school some initial direction on the importance of languages, cultures, and world affairs for our students, so you can understand the world, so you'd have an interest in being able to make a difference because you could understand it. And Karen said, what do you think about the College of Charleston? And I said, that's a great idea. I love it. I'd love to see that happen. And it was an interesting situation in the middle of COVID. Nobody wanted to be close to anybody else. Everything was virtual. And it moved rather quickly from Karen's suggestion. I then called the gentleman to my left, Tim Johnson, who has been one of the most incredible aspects of what LCWA is all about. As two other gentlemen that also were deans here. And now we have Amy Arias, who came in on the tail end and has done an incredible amount of work and good things. But I called up President Hsu. I said, Dr. Hsu, do you think you'd be interested in the EastWest Institute being part of the College of Charleston's LCWA? Yes. I said, okay. And with that, Tim and I began to work together on what we would do. But the beauty of stars aligning, Andrew Hsu, our new president at the time, had the foresight with his provost, Suzanne Austin, who was also new to the college, to task our deans with what would you do if you didn't have a resource issue? What would you want for your school to do? what do you think would really have impact on your students? And Tim, God bless him, he came up with something like a Global Leadership Institute, which when I came back to Tim with what can we present to the EastWest Institute to compete with these other institutions and demonstrate who we are and what we can do with their resources and their archives, he tweaked his big idea so that by the time it was put back out to the EastWest Institute Steering Committee by me with Tim and a lady named Jenny Fowler, who is the lead development officer for the College of Charleston, it was rather warmly received. And we had a lot of discussion with the steering committee or the selection committee for where the assets of the Institute would go. And they ended up recommending to the board that they felt the College of Charleston, which when we first presented the college, they didn't know the College of Charleston, what it was. They didn't really know about it. They knew nothing about the School of Languages, Cultures, and World Affairs, but they heard our story. They believed in us. They recommended it to the board. And as you may know, or find, you will find, boards sometimes aren't the most immediate responses. They don't move as quickly as you want them to be. And I had the advancement office at the College of Charleston saying, we got to get this done. This is great. And I had this woman named Edwin Mroz, who never sat still, who wanted to have everything happen yesterday. And let's get going on what we're going to do tomorrow. So we ended up with a situation where Karen decided, I think you need to speak to the chairman of the board of directors for the EastWest Institute so we can bring this to a head. And that gentleman's name was Ross Perot Jr., who I knew a little bit from the Institute, but not much. And so I called Ross and we had a nice conversation, for about 10 minutes. And I ended up and I said, Ross, the College of Charleston needs to have a commitment from the Institute that we're going to move forward so we know what's going on. We'd been over here at the college dancing for 6 months, trying to make sure we had the right package, that we would win the support. Then we got the support, and we were waiting for the board's answer. So I said, Ross, we need a substantial commitment. And he responded, Hilton, I'm going to do whatever Karen wants. I went, great. Okay. So within a few days, we received a confirmation that the board had decided to make a significant investment into the School of Languages, Cultures, and World Affairs. And with that, very shortly thereafter, the call that I got from Karen in July of 22, December 31 of 2022, the Institute closed. And all their documents, all the resources came to the college. And it's been an incredible impact. And as I sit here today with many of the people in this room, other than our students and our faculty, the other people wouldn't be here. They would have not had the impact they've had on this school. We would have not had Karen come to the college, who in 2.5 years made an unbelievable impact. She joined our school after the agreement was made that we were moving forward. Karen immediately wanted to join the board of the School of LCWA. Karen wanted to be on the Global Institute's search committee or their, whatever we call it, our steering committee. And it's just been the impact of Karen, her friends. She brought people here that didn't know about the college. They have had such impact. All these awareness. Languages, we had a great deal with. A lot of support here at the college. You all have a great School of Language. And with your current leadership, it's going to stay in place for a long time. Everyone's going to need to take 4 semesters of languages. And the cultural impact and inclusion in your study of languages. That's the EastWest Institute's impact as well. And we do that. But world affairs, we were lacking on. Well, today we are light years ahead of where we were before this merger with the Institute occurred. And, the bottom line is the Institute believed that real change was going to happen with its students, the young people of the world. That's who they believe in. Every time we would go to a city, to a community, and we would meet with all these leaders, all these main business players, John and the Institute relished having students involved, hearing what they thought, where they felt the solutions would be. So I feel very pleased that this has all happened and that the college is the right place, because you all, the students, have been incredibly responsive. You all have really reacted. We have national awards being given to students, awarded to students from LCWA. We have so many great things that have happened. Our kids are getting great jobs. So it's been a home run for us, in my opinion. But Tim, let me pass the ball to you, because you had so much with what it's become.
Yeah, Tim, would you just speak for a few minutes about sort of your introduction to the EastWest Institute and the development of the Mroz Institute, and your view of that process?
Well, there's a reason I'm on the end. Make no mistake about it, I'm the caboose to this affair. And I have benefited from advisors that have the longevity that's needed when you try to put something together and reimagine it in a different space or different setting, which is what this is. So the two gentlemen sitting to my right, your left, Mitch Sonkin and Hilton Smith, are two of those that have that. Some of you are in the audience who have been tremendous mentors to me: Larry Gillespie, David Cohen, Sam Hines, Catherine Smith, others that are here that have been a part of all making sure that this takes place. Because I am, by training and inclination, a classicist. And the biggest joy from my life is opening a Greek or Latin text or talking about the culture of the Mediterranean. And I ended up, as a surprise to me, sitting in a leadership position for a school of languages, an international school. And when I sat down in the seat, that's when you really start to say, okay, what am I going to do now? And one thing that became clear to me very quickly and was impressed on me by Sir Cohen back there in the back is that an international perspective for students and in education is so important and vital that it cannot be confined artificially to particular disciplines. So the question arises is, how do you give access or promote an international perspective in education across an entire campus? And so we began working on a series of programming that would do that. And that's where EWI found us at that point. And EWI gave us the energy and the legacy to bring those various programs together in a network, to bring those various programs together and start to make strategic sense of it. And then there's Karen. And I have to tell you, a lot of things have been said about Karen, all noteworthy and true, and more could be said. But what I felt the most was just the pleasure that she took in this project and how much fun she had with this project for no, to me, apparent reason than that she did. And that provided such joy in working on it. And what a tremendous gift that is. And so as I thought about where the Institute is now, and I pointed out to Hilton last night that the summits now have the number 4 in front of it, and I like those numbers going up. When I thought about that, there are some touch points that remind me so much of her that are evident in the Institute that I'd like to remind myself of in lessons that I learned from Karen in the course of this. First is the principle of better sooner than later. Okay. I never had to sit back and wonder what would Karen do, because Karen told me and told me repeatedly.
Yeah.
Until I managed to get it. And, you know, one of the things that I was sitting with John Omre in the CSIS up in DC, trying to educate myself on international education, what's going on. And it became clear to me that what happens is that a lot of these opportunities that are available in education happen at the upper undergraduate level or in graduate school. And what we really needed to do, and Karen was all about early education, was to take those opportunities and bring them down to first-year students. And so they had those experiences all the way through their undergraduate career. And all of Karen's work reminds you of that, from her work in refugees and the importance that she places on education, to the development of interns. And that was really a very important touch point, and remains that way for the Institute. Second, hard work and excellence matters. It matters a lot, because institutes don't develop from restaurants with small groups and in institutions without plans and documents and some types of processes. Lots of documents, lots of processes.
A lawyer also helps. Right?
That's right. And Karen's eagle eye was on every one of those here for the Mroz Institute. Her creativity is there, and it invites us to take the risk of being creative. You know, when we look around and we see that we're doing the same thing as everybody else, then maybe it's time to do something different. And that's what Karen does, is, okay, let's try this. Life is lived best face to face. Our modern society puts us behind screens a lot. So much so that my chiropractor tells me that I'd be better off if I looked up from my phone. That's really good advice. To get out from behind the screens and engage people. Karen did not live her life behind screens and in memos. She was out and about and in the camps and meeting people and working with people and hosting and entertaining and bringing people together so they could talk. And what I'm reminded of most recently in the Institute is to remember, you don't have to be up front in order to lead. We forget that sometimes, and we become so wrapped up in egos that we actually begin to think that we can solve big problems by ourselves without people, to the point that we turn our backs on teamwork and community. And that's a risk that's not worth taking. The old adage and principle that if you want to lead, the best place sometimes is from behind, is exemplified in Karen. From finding hotel rooms for conferences at the last minute, lots of hotel rooms. Karen was the best support person I ever met. just absolutely tremendous. And so that's, I think, part of the essence that ties this line together from the meeting in the restaurant and all of the unbelievable things that EWI did into the education and lives of students and us moving forward, is to remember that leadership is not an ego trip. It's based on humility and servanthood and a tremendous amount of tenacity. And that's Mroz. Okay. So it's been a privilege to be involved.
Tim, I mean, how can I follow that? Thank you for those
Just
wonderful
keep
remarks.
going.
Yeah, but I want to underline a couple of things that you brought up that I think tie nicely in with considering the legacy all the way from the EastWest Institute all the way through to the Mroz Institute. One is this international sensibility, and I think that is, I think that's definitely a through line. And it was something that the EastWest Institute exemplified and tried to cultivate, and that I think we see now being cultivated in the Mroz Institute. And the other thing that you mentioned was the joy.
Yeah.
And Mitch can confirm, and Hilton as well, that part of the reason that the Institute functioned so well was that it often invited people, couples, men and women, onto the board together. So there was no real separation between professional life and family life, I think, for the Mrozes. And that actually worked really well, because you start interacting with people as human beings rather than as avatars of particular nationalities. And family was very important to them. And something that I found a lot in the interviews that I did for the book, and that we continue to do. Blake, I want to acknowledge your work as well on the EastWest Institute Oral History Archive that is housed also at the College of Charleston, which you can see interviews with all of these gentlemen, and you can see my groggy face on Zoom. Is that something that struck me throughout all of that is the joy and the pleasure of just being together and of having fun, and that oftentimes your best work is when you're having fun, and that is something that I have taken with me into my own personal life, and that has always struck me with the Institute, is that they also knew how to have fun. So I want to create space here for questions from the audience. We've covered a really wide range of topics, but before we do that, maybe I can ask. So a question that I always asked in the interviews was part of what made the EastWest Institute, and I think makes Mroz Institute so special, is this focus on people as human beings and things like that. Do any of you have stories that you like to tell, sort of like the quintessential John or Karen Mroz story? I know for me, it's I never had a conversation with Karen that lasted less than 2 hours. We talked about everything, but it never felt like 2 hours. It always evaporated very quickly. It was really lovely. Yeah, Mitch, you want to start us off?
Sure, I can give you a couple of quips. There was no short conversation with John.
Yeah.
And John also walked around with a pocket full of index cards.
Mm.
And when you sat and talked to him, when he was brainstorming with you, whether it was dealing with logistics, whether it was dealing with upcoming meetings that we were having with leaders, and what we referred back then to the East, and we did meet with, Honecker and others before the change took place. His mind worked faster than his pen. But I just want to touch on, humility, as Tim said, teamwork, community. I think we're strongly behind the success of the Institute. And I'll add one to that, and that is discretion. I want the students in the group to a little assignment, so to speak, and that is history repeats itself, as we know, and we're all aware of we're all acutely aware of what's going on in the Middle East, Palestinian, Israeli issues. I want to take you back to the early 1980s. And John was involved as a emissary between the then President Ronald Reagan, the White House. Alexander Haig was a unique individual, but he was Secretary of State. And John had dozens of meetings, secret meetings, with Yasser Arafat, who then was the head of the Palestinian Liberation Organization, in an attempt to see whether a deal could be negotiated to try to gain recognition of a Palestinian state, in return recognition of Israel's right to exist. 1981, folks. Okay. Where are we today?
Yeah.
If you want a little more background on it, go and find a New York Times article that appeared in February of 1984, I believe, where on the front page, front and center, it was revealed that these secret talks were going on between the White House and the PLO, which of course was a big no-no back then, especially after the UN resolution. And it'll give you a little window into just one type of conflict resolution and relationship building that went on. I'm sure you can find it. You guys are incredibly facile. You'll find it online.
You can also find it in the book.
Anyway, it's a good anecdote and a good way to remember some of the things that Tim had to say.
Mhm.
And relationships are important, and the ability to build bridges, and the ability to do that face to face, which is really important.
Thank you, yeah. Any other little anecdotes before we open up for questions? We have 5 minutes left. Okay, we're gonna just go right into questions. Anybody have any questions for this illustrious group? We can keep talking. What about Vladimir or Catherine?
I just want to give an anecdote because
Please, yeah.
back in around 2005 or 7, John and Karen were staying with us at our home out in Hollywood, South Carolina. And John was trying to arrange to get people out of the West Bank or Gaza and through Israel for everybody to fly to some undisclosed place. I don't know if it was in Switzerland or where. And he was back and forth. And I said, you don't understand. We are surrounded by military bases here. There is not a conversation that you possibly could have that's not being picked up. So, this YA. So all night long, and lucky we had one at that point, we had a fax machine. So we had faxes going in and out and in and out of the West Bank and Israel. And the big problem was not getting this person out, but getting them back through Israel. So they could go home. And Karen would tell me, because I had hoped to go with her on one of her trips into the West Bank. She said, just you have to keep your mouth shut. They will ask you every kind of question. They will pat you down. They will humiliate you. They will anger you. Just have to stay the course. You're going for a reason. Don't tell them what it is. But just keep your mouth shut and go, because otherwise you're thrown in prison.
Yeah.
So she was, along with John and the work that he did, she did it herself.
Mhm. Yeah.
It's not safe.
Yeah. Any other?
But
Yeah.
Well, I remember you mentioned John's sense of humility. He used to say, don't take yourself too serious. But at the same time, he was very attentive to various details. And just one little detail. I remember I was going with John to a meeting, And he was always very attentive to preparing for meetings, to pick up as much detail as possible about the individual politician or businessman we're going to meet. At that point, that was in Moscow in the late 2000s. Something changed, and we had to pick up these details very quickly, just on the ground, picking up the information on our cell phones. And I also looked on my shoes at that moment. This was all in Russian. I saw that while traversing the street, I had problems with the cleanness of my shoes. And I took out a sponge out of my bag and started cleaning the shoes. And John told me, "We are learning."
I love it.
Yeah, but anyway, thank you very much for the community here in Charleston and the College of Charleston to keeping the stream and the soul of EastWest Institute alive, taking it from one body and injecting it into another living body of this institution and this community. But I wanted to ask you, John liked to reinvent the institution at every time of troubles, of difficult times, of changing political environment, etc. And we see currently the similar situation of very turbulent times, changing political, economic environments, technological environments, and probably after a few years of existence of the John Mroz Global Leadership Institute, would you see a need to reinvent, to start reinventing this institution? And actually, what specific challenges do you see that we need to face? First of all, priority challenges in our current difficult times.
Great question. It's a great question. And I also want to acknowledge Vladimir. Vladimir Ivanov was the head of the EastWest Institute's Russia office for many, many years. So he's got some fabulous stories. And I'd encourage you folks to chat him up at the end of all of this. Lightning round answer. We don't have a ton of time left.
I would say that would be up to Dean Arias. But if you don't morph, you die. So the institution and what we do, and you all, the students, are going to cause us to continue to look at new things, look at them in different ways. So you're right, Vladimir, we will have to continue to morph. But again, I have 4 deans that I respect in this room, and I would be deferring to them, even Tim.
Well, if I was to say one thing, I would say that the future of this is how to avoid the intense pressure to compartmentalize.
Mhm.
Because specialization is growing so complex, especially with AI and everything coming out, that students' hours are being crowded out. And that constantly, that pushes the need to reinvent how you're going to put out a curriculum that's going to get access. Because what always, Vladimir, really sits on the back of your shoulder is, I love every student that's here, but I want to know where the others are. Okay, and what's
take a short break?
going to do that? That's okay. And what's going to do that? There you go.
We have about 8 minutes until the next session. So thank you so much for this discussion. And thank you so much for your comments. Sorry we couldn't get to all of you. I see
Sorry
you.
we didn't get to you.
I'm sorry we won't be able to get to your comments. But maybe